Good afternoon, members. I'm Jill Hollyoake from Democratic Services. I'm just going to take you through the agenda until you get to your election of chair. I'll just start off with a housekeeping notice. Please note that this meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for subsequent public broadcast. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Please could I remind members and officers to use their microphones when you're speaking. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests. If the alarm goes off, please leave through the emergency exit at the back of the room and assemble at the front of the building by the public toilets. Finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switched to the silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. So item 1 on your agenda is apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Lawrence Fear and from Councillor Tony O'Neill. Item 2, substitute members. Councillor Judy Butt is here for Councillor Lawrence Fear today, and Councillor Brian Dion is here for Councillor Tony O'Neill. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations on the agenda items which are before you? No. Okay, so I'll record that as none. Item 4, election of chair. Are there any nominations? Councillor Bartlett?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Simon Bull for chair of the Planning Committee. Thank you.
And I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Prodovone. Are there any further nominations?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Okay, Councillor Anne Stribley. And are there any further nominations? Okay. So if more than one person is nominated, the Constitution requires a secret ballot to be held. So what we will do is ask members to vote by writing the name of their preferred candidate on the lilac slip, which Chris is going to pass round, and then fold it and place it in the lilac container. Are members happy with that procedure? Okay. Do the candidates want to say a few words before we go to the vote?
That'd be useful.
Okay. So, Councillor Simon Bull.
Yep, thank you. I'm Councillor Simon Bull. I've been on the Planning Committee of Bournemouth Borough Council for the last 2.5 years. And I'm I've also been on the planning agenda board and the planning policy committee, and happy to accept the nomination. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Jill. Yeah, I'm Councillor Kelsey. I chaired the board in Bournemouth for the last 10 years, been on the planning board for 12 years. If I am the chair of this board, I'd like to make sure that it remains as it has under my chairmanship previously, which is totally non-political and not afraid to challenge officers and decisions that are put in front of us. Thank you.
So, members, that's 8 votes in favour of Councillor Simon Bull and 7 votes in favour of Councillor David Kelsey. So, Councillor Simon Bull, you're elected as chairman. So, if you'd like to come and take the chair.
Would help if I could work the microphone system. That's my first test. Right. Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be elected chair, and as Kelsey says, I indeed agree that we'd like this to move forward in a non-political way, and I look forward to working with you all. Thank you. We now move on to the item 5, which is the election of the vice chair. Do we have any nominations?
Councillor David Kelsey.
Do we have a seconder for that? Are there any other nominations?
Yes. I'd like to propose Councillor Simon McCormack.
And I will second that.
Thank you. Therefore, we need to go to another vote. Any other nominations before we do so? No. Simon McCormack received 9 votes and David Kelsey received 6 votes. So Simon McCormack is duly elected as Vice Chair. Okay, moving on. Next item on the agenda is public issues. Are there?
Thanks, Chairman. There are no public questions or petitions for the meeting. There is a statement which we've received from Susan Chapman on nature conservation as a material planning consideration, which she'd like to read out to you. If you'd like to come forward.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Youth Strike for Climate youngsters handed in yet another petition to BCP Council on Friday as our world hurtles towards climate breakdown. They are begging for, number 1, no further fossil fuel extraction, our money to go to renewables instead. Number 2, reduce landfill waste, especially food which creates methane. Number 3, restore wildlife habitats by planting trees and allowing open spaces to be wilder. Number 4, encourage sustainable transport with better cycle lanes and more buses, preferably electric. To summarise, they are asking for a speedy response as we're running out of time. Collapsing Mother Nature needs protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Chapman. Moving on, there's item 7, which is the protocol for public speaking at Planning Committee. Yeah.
I'll just take you through that quickly, members. So there are general provisions in the Council's constitution for public questions, statements and petitions. The constitution requires us to have a separate protocol for receiving public representations on planning applications being considered by the Planning Committee. So the representations are normally comprised of 2 groups, objectors and applicants, supporters. And it's helpful for all parties to have clear, fair and equitable arrangements in place. The report sets out a proposal for the committee to consider. The proposal includes a suggestion for the number of speakers, which is suggested to be 2 for each side. It suggests a time allowance, which is proposed to be 5 minutes for each side, which is to be shared if there's more than 1 speaker. And it also allows discretion to increase the number and time allowances for significant major applications in recognition of the complexity and range of issues and interested parties that are involved in those sorts of applications. The report aims to strike a balance between previous practices and what other local authorities do, but it's obviously for you as members to discuss and take a view on what you want. The committee may also wish to consider whether or not to apply a time allowance to ward councillors. If you do, you may also wish to consider whether this should be the same as for all the other speakers. So the committee is asked to consider Appendix 1 and agree the protocol as proposed, or make such amendments as you consider appropriate. If I could just draw your attention to an error in point number 12 of the appendix on page 6 and seek your agreement to correct the wording so that it reads, please note that meetings of the Planning Committee are audio recorded by the Council for subsequent public broadcast and may also be filmed by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. So,
Thank you. So, councillors, does anybody want to raise any points on this?
Thank you, Chairman. Just one. I'm perfectly happy with all the proposals and the suggestion that generally it should be 2 speakers permitted from each side. But from past experience, on rare occasions, I know for one reason or another, they might require a 3rd speaker, and I think that should be at the Chairman's discretion. So that I think that needs to be built in so that it's not entirely cut off. So I think it should generally be 2 speakers, and you'd expect to conform to that on 99% of occasions, but I think it should be at the Chairman's discretion to allow additional speaker if required.
Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with that with my colleague here. I also think that the 5-minute limit is a bit prescriptive. I'd like to see the chairman have the flexibility to extend that at will, regardless whether it's opposing or pro application. I just would like to see a bit more flexibility in the timing.
Councillor Butt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 things. Firstly, with regard to Councillor Bartlett's point, that's extremely equitable, but you need to be equitable, I think, because there may be a concern there where if you're allowing your discretion, the discretion has to be constant. It'll be a difficult thing for you, but I'm sure something within your capability, but something that we will all need to keep an eye on. And the third thing, we are in 3 and 2 ward councillors. Now, I don't know if we have a ratio where we have one ward where we have 3 different councillors from different backgrounds, so to speak. Now, they all may want to speak. If they have 5 minutes between 3 of them, that's not equitable. So it may be that you'd want to use your discretion there, or whether councillors get 3 minutes each or some such, because we may have a ratio where there's a different makeup. I'm not sure we have that at the moment, but it may occur in the future. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hilliard?
Thank you, Chairman. I think term 11 covers a lot of what's just been spoken about, because it's saying about exceptional circumstances. It does give the chairman and committee discretion to extend, and as the case allows. The other question I had was, where does this protocol get placed? Does it on our website, obviously, but if there's an applicant, do they get sent it? And similarly, if there's an objector, do they get sent it prior to the meeting?
we would normally either point them to the website, or we can send it as a document. Chairman, I don't know if you want to take each of those points in turn and agree to sort of like amend. Can I come back on a couple of things? Is that all right? In terms of what is set out at 11, I think that is intended for really major applications where you might want to allocate, say, up to 30 minutes speaking time, and that would be agreed in advance. What I'm understanding is that you want more flexibility, perhaps at the meeting itself, rather than being put in the protocol.
Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, it's exactly that. For many applicants, this will be a major application for them because it's probably the only one they'll ever put in their life. And it's important that they're given the opportunity to express their wishes at the meeting. And I think, 5 minutes may not always be long enough. Some of the apparently most simple planning decisions are actually, when you get into it, very, very complex. And so I don't think you can divide it quite simply between, major applications and routine applications in that way. And I just think the flexibility will help us with our business and ensure that residents are actually heard properly. Thank you.
Chairman, I think it's whether you actually want that set out in the protocol, or just as a sort of asterisk, maybe to say, please note that number of speakers and time allowed may be increased at the meeting at the chairman's discretion, or if you just want to play it by ear.
Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. Would it actually help by adding the words exceptionally in cases of significant, significant or controversial added to the major? Because not every major application is controversial, but there are some smaller applications that are controversial, and again, not every small application isn't significant. You know, there can be significance in all sorts of applications, but I think if it's left at the chair's discretion, I think that would be the fairest way of doing it, but it could be written into 11 quite easily.
Councillor Stripley.
Thank you, Chairman. Certainly, my preceding council, it's been 5 minutes speaking time for objectors and applicants for a long time, and that's actually proved more than adequate, and at the chairman's discretion to allow somebody to finish in effect their last sentence. I take the point perhaps with different ward councillors. Very rarely again have we seen from long experience more than one ward councillor choosing to speak at a committee, so I would suggest it remains at 5 minutes for a ward councillor. In exceptional cases, if 2 ward councillors wish to speak, they could have 3 minutes each, or 2 minutes each. But I would prefer to see it stuck at 5 minutes. Otherwise, everybody is going to be demanding your discretion, and we have no rules to run by.
Councillor Barts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't sure if you'd see me there or not. Yes, I think there's going to be an awful lot of matters here left to your discretion, and I think the whole idea is to have a protocol that we can materially rely on. So my concern is there, we mustn't leave it too flexible. The issue also that Jill raised with regard to this actual protocol, the word was we can send it. I think a link would be good, because all applicants are reminded with regard to their speaking ability and obligations and duties. So if they want to know more, they're going to have a link to see this when we eventually arrive at a decision about it today. But I don't think we leave it so flexible that it's not actually a piece of documentation that we can materially rely on. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on your appointment. I very much understand what Councillor Bartlett is intending by this. I think we appreciate that this is planning is a difficult and detailed operation of this authority. I think the point has been made, and I just want to reinforce it, that by opening up too much flexibility, it's actually quite dangerous for us. This is a quasi-judicial role that we're fulfilling, and we need to have some quite clear rules. So I think to some extent, by trying to open up, number 11, whether it's major, minor, etc., that's actually, we're tying ourselves up in knots a bit, and maybe not quite doing what we're setting out to do. I think all preceding authorities and any other operation have very much worked in terms of a chair's discretion. There's some inherent discretion in terms of a chair, and a strong chair, which I'm sure you'll prove to be, will have no problem with that, I'm sure. So if we absolutely felt it was necessary, I could support an asterisk, type suggestion. But my understanding and my belief is this is actually good enough as it is, and a chair will offer discretion as and when it's required. I don't think you're too bound by this. If our officer tells us that that's not the case, then I'm happy to propose the asterisk suggestion, but I don't think that's actually required for you. Thank you.
Councillor Bartlett.
Just a point on the speaking time for ward councillors. I think the way the protocol is written, it does imply 5 minutes per ward councillor as opposed to 5 minutes shared. So I think if you have, 3 councillors with a different perspective from the 3 ward councillors, they would actually be entitled to speak for a total of 15 minutes. But I think I would like to second. I think you've made a proposal there, Drew, and so I think I would like to second the proposal that we do put a note with an asterisk stating that the chairman will exercise discretion as required during the meeting.
Happy for that.
So just to be clear, there's an asterisk that will say that the chair will exercise discretion as required during the meeting regarding,
Yes.
as appropriate, regarding the number,
Simple as that. Just as simple as
We've
that.
had disabled people
but
that
this is
need
to do with the number of
read
speakers and the
extra.
time, isn't it? Okay.
So shall we have a vote on that motion?
Happy with that?
Those in favour?
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Any against?
Abstentions?
Any abstentions?
Only you, Chairman.
Oh, I voted for. I would have voted for the motion had I had my wits about me at that point. So,
This isn't entirely appropriate when it's talking about public speaking, but I don't know where else I can raise it. Previous experience has shown that a lot of people, usually objectors, but not only objectors, come to the meeting and bring documents that are put on our desks at the start of the meeting. We don't have any time to read them. It's not always, I mean, we've got this one from Susan Chapman, but that's a script of what she said, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
Sometimes documents, there is no speaker, but they present a document, and I think it should be made clear to them that, frankly, it's a waste of time because we don't have time to read it. It won't get properly looked at. If they want to submit anything, it's got to be done in advance or not at all.
thank you for that. I think that's covered under item 6 of the protocol for public speaking. It must be provided by 12 noon on the day before the meeting.
Well, it refers specifically to speakers. It's not always speakers. It can sometimes be others.
I guess the wording could be amended to cover
Anyone?
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 any information.
Chairman, sorry. I take Councillor Padman's point on that, but even if they're submitted the night before, members may well not have time to read or understand them. I think if they've had notice of the meeting, they know what it's about, they have their support or objections prepared, I think there should be at least 48 hours before the meeting to give members a clear day in which to read them and check anything that they need to do.
Does anybody else wish to comment on that?
In terms of point 6, that can be amended to read that anyone who wishes to submit written information instead of just speakers. Would that cover that issue?
For 48 hours?
I don't know, Chairman, if members want to take a view on that formally.
Thank you. I mean, I pick up the point very much around any documentation needs to be submitted, in advance, and I think so. A change to the wording there would be useful. Getting too much into detail of trying to change this, I appreciate this is our committee, it's our constitution, but trying to make constitutions and laws up on the spot is difficult, and it's probably not well advised. But this document would have had a reasonable amount of review and testing before, so I'd rather not start opening up 24, 48, etc. But I believe that at point 6, anybody who wished to put the information forward must be in advance is perfectly valid. And if Marion would like to propose that, I'll second that change.
Propose that. I mean, probably I would have put a slightly longer time period, but we could go with the noon on the day before.
I'm just.
At some other future point. So speakers and others.
Yeah.
Who wish to submit. We just need to add the and others.
Is everyone in agreement on that? Lovely, thank you. Chairman, there was the issue about the ward councillors as well at point number 10. Would members want to leave it as it is?
Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to you, Councillor Bartlett. You can read it two ways. It says ward councillors in 5 minutes. So is that in their entirety or is that each? I think we need to be specific. If it's going to be each, fine. That the chance of all three turning up are probably fairly slim. You might get two if they're opposing backgrounds, but you can play it by ear. But I think we need to be clear on what that actually is. It's a little ambiguous. Thank you.
So can we look at the wording?
Certainly. I mean, would you like it to be 5 minutes speaking time in total? Yeah. And then you have that asterisk for discretion. Okay.
Bartlett?
No, I can't agree with that. I'm afraid that, you know, 5 minutes divided between 3 ward councillors with views on important matters is just not, in my view, enough. I believe 5 minutes is appropriate for each ward councillor, and I think the wording as it's written, I understood it as, you know, if you wanted to clarify that, but I certainly I would not agree, or wouldn't agree to 5 minutes between 3 ward councillors.
Mr.
Hence my amendment to suggest 3 minutes to each councillor if they wish to speak for a considerable time in Poole, and I know the New Forest were certainly running the same system. Applicants and objectors actually only had 3 minutes to speak, and they found it perfectly adequate because they had to stick to planning issues and not, well, my Auntie Mary's very upset about this, etc. So you could adjust it.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think in previous experience, and you'll be well aware of this, having sat on the board for 4 years, 5 minutes is just not long enough for a ward councillor to always get their point across. And I think, bearing in mind that we're now taking away the 10 call-in points of view, residents are going to be relying far more on their ward councillors to do their speaking for them. I think taking away the 10 call-in things is probably something that may well need to be revisited at a later stage, but that's what we have at the moment. I think allowing 5 minutes for each ward councillor, bearing in mind that would only be a maximum of 3, and as rightly said, possibilities are that one of those 3 will be sat on the planning board anyway, with a mixture of people here. So we're likely to only get 2, and I don't think that is, you know, too long for those people to do it. So I think 5 minutes each councillor should be sufficient. And I think that's how we go, because at the end of the day, the ward councillor is there to represent their residents. Not all residents are capable of standing up in front of a bunch of people that they don't know, dressed in suits that appear to be like a courtroom. And they feel very uncomfortable at doing it. So therefore, I think the ward councillor should be given that opportunity to speak for his 5 minutes, and all ward councillors should be given the same. Thank you, Chairman.
So are you proposing that, Councillor Kelsey?
I'll second that.
I would quite happily propose that it's 5 minutes for each councillor, Chairman.
I'll happily so second.
So those in favour, do you want to show your...
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
And those against?
2.
And won't be any.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, you've agreed that to amend point 10 so that it's a maximum of 5 minutes per ward councillor. Thank you. So, Chairman, I don't know if any further comments or amendments on the document, or whether you want to move to adopt it as amended.
Yeah, move to amend as adopted. Yeah.
Is that seconded? Thank you. Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So, Richard Genge from Planning is going to take the next report. Richard Genge.
Okay, we're now moving on to item 8, which is the Planning Committee site visit protocol, and Richard Gange is going to lead us through that.
Yes, good afternoon, members. The purpose of this paper is seeks to try and combine all of the preceding site visit protocols from Bournemouth Pool Christchurch, as well as to seek to adopt best practice. As set out in the reason for the recommendation on page 1, it is important that members adopt a protocol. It's for you to decide what protocol that is. You'll be aware that you're in a quasi-judicial role and that all of your actions could be subject to scrutiny at a later stage. So it is important that we follow the protocol in the same way so as to avoid any criticism. Members will also be aware that when you look at any planning application, there are some exceptional cases, and I would stress exceptional cases, where you may feel the need to go on site. In most circumstances, when we present an application to you, we hope to have sufficient visual material on screen, photographs, Google Earth, or whatever we can provide to you to avoid a site visit. But there will be some cases where those photographs are not sufficient, where you need to attend the site visit to look from a particular vantage point which is not in the public domain. And this sets out how to do that. At paragraph 4 on page 8, the protocol is suggesting that when you get the agenda papers, and you'll get the agenda papers, I think 5 working days before the committee, having looked at those papers, you need to let Democratic Services know whether you feel a site visit is necessary. There will be a chairman's briefing prior to committee. We've yet to discuss with the chairman at what time that briefing is, so we can let you know that. And that the chairman then, in consultation with officers, will consider whether there are exceptional reasons for the committee to go onto that site visit. And I stress it's the committee. If a site visit is undertaken, that will form part of the planning committee. There will be occasions where during the course of the debate, where you may not have anticipated a site visit was necessary. There could be an issue brought up by ward members or residents where you feel there's no visual material, or there's visual material you want to check on site, and you may well look to postpone the decision to either allow officers to get more information for you or to postpone for a site visit. In that instance, the protocol sets out that the site visit will be held immediately before the following meeting, so that you're not adjourning the meeting here and you go on site and come back. It's trying to manage the process. When a site visit is arranged, officers will notify the applicant and agent and of the site visit. We will set out for you the time of that site visit. We will invite members of the planning committee, ward councillors and relevant officers to the site. It needs to be remembered that councillors have no right of entry to private land except by permission of the owner, so you should not enter the private site until the members are present or the officers are present there with you. The important part to read, I think, is the conduct of site visit, and there's issues there in the protocol setting out about the conduct of ensuring that during the site visit there should be no discussion with the applicant or agent or any third party, including board members. This should be avoided. Presentation by the applicants will also not be permitted. So this is ensuring that you are there to establish matters of fact from the officers and for the officers to point out those matters of fact for you, so you can come back to the committee and consider the application, debate the application and reach a decision on that application. That site visit in the protocol is proposed to be chaired by the chairman, be formally opened and formally closed, so you know when the site visit is occurring. We all know your colleagues as ward members may well be there, and you may well want to say something beyond the site visit to the ward member afterwards. So it allows for that to happen when that meeting's closed. You're also entitled in the protocol to ask matters of fact of the officer. There might be issues that, having read through the papers, but you just want to know how close is it to the neighbouring property. the window you're referring to in the papers, which window is that on a neighbouring site? So you may well want that to be pointed out so the rest of the members are fully aware of the features of the site. The ward councillors in the protocol would also be allowed at the end of the site visit to point out particular features of the site that he or she considers relevant to the understanding of the application. Not to present their view of how you should determine the application, but again, presenting those matters of fact. When undertaking a site visit, there's various general matters there to make sure that when you're on site, we all keep together. We're not allowed to stray off into different groups or stray off towards the applicant and agent. The perception, as you're all aware of from your training, is very important here. The perception to make sure that you are there as a body, as the planning committee, to view the site to establish facts, and not to have the perception or reality if it occurs, but you're there talking to the applicant, the agent, or an adjoining resident. Paragraph 26, there is probably one issue you may want to consider. There's probably the rest of the report perfectly entitled to ask questions on, but the one issue which is there is when it is considered that a site visit is necessary, it is essential that all members of the planning committee are present, and when members of the planning committee are unable to attend a site visit, they will be unable to vote on the application. Now, that's probably an issue for you to consider, whether that's relevant. It's an issue that we've taken legal advice on, and we believe that's the correct advice we should be giving you. But you're the planning committee, and I welcome your views on the report.
Mrs. Barrable.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things on the wording. Us lawyers are very particular about how things are worded, I'm afraid. Just a couple of bits of clarity. In 5, it's got seek to postpone the decision on any given application until a site visit of the planning committee is arranged. You won't be postponing it until the site visit has been arranged, till after the site visit has been attended and you've then subsequently had any debate. So that just needs slight changing. Later on, there's reference to the word deferral. It could be an adjournment or a deferral. It could be an adjournment or a deferral. Well, there's reference to whether at the very end it says because it's not necessarily going to be a deferral, or it would most likely, hopefully, be an adjournment. In 13, it says where the planning committee postpones the decision. That again will either be a deferral or an adjournment. And the only other one I can see at the moment is the one Richard's just referred to in 26 as unable to attend the site visit, they will be unable to vote on the application. From a legal perspective, we would encourage that is the case, because if you're not at the site inspection, you haven't actually seen the whole of what's been discussed or pointed out. However, if you're going to take that on board that you're unable to vote, I would also say that to make it clear that you would be unable to take part in the proceedings and vote. So you wouldn't be able, if that was the case that you were unable to vote, you wouldn't take part in the debate either. But obviously members will discuss whether that is something they think is acceptable.
Chairman, with respect, I absolutely agree with that, but unable to vote, but presumably the member could speak if they were a ward member.
I think, yes. I mean, that will be I understand what you're saying, sorry, Councillor Stribley. I think what you're saying is that they've gone as a ward member and they would still be able to speak as a ward member. Yes, but if they're speaking as a ward member rather than the planning board member, that will be covered in the code of conduct. And yes, they would be able to speak, but they would still not take part anyway. Yeah.
Can I ask, does this allow for conclusion of the application on site? Which I know we've done that in Bournemouth before.
As I read it, that is not the intention. That the site visit will be, because there's no debate and just questions on those specific issues on the site. My understanding is that this is just the protocol for site visits, and unless Richard tells me otherwise, I believe what I know Bournemouth have done it differently. The intention, I think, is to have the site visit and then come and have the debate. But I know that at training yesterday it was referred to that ward members on planning board potentially might have seen a site several times and might be familiar with it, and he said that there might not be a necessity for them to attend the site visit. I would always say, from a legal perspective, just like I would anticipate if a member arrives late, they haven't seen necessarily all the debate, they don't know all the points. It's for clarity and transparency. I would personally suggest that it was better to have, them having seen all of it or not take part.
Yeah.
If I can just add one point of clarity on the site visit, and it's a point I missed out in the opening. At the site visit, there will be occasions, for whatever reason, where the applicant agent may choose, it's their land, not to allow the public onto their site. They may allow the committee to go on site accompanied by the chairman. It's in part for that reason why the report is suggesting you carry out your site visit to establish matters of fact. You can't conclude then the meeting on site because the meeting should be in public and the public may not be there. So you need to come back to the committee in public to debate and conclude the application.
So, members, do we have any? Councillor Bartlett?
I think it really just to clarify the point that Nicola Barrable has said, that in paragraph 5 then, on the third line, we need to say, can during the debate seek deferment or adjournment or adjourn the decision on any application. And also in the second line from the bottom on paragraph 5, it should say, and secondly, whether deferral or adjournment can allow for officers to source additional information. And I think that then clarifies that point. And also on paragraph 13, where the planning committee defers or adjourns the decision on the application. Yeah. And I think that then clarifies that issue.
Councillor Hilliard?
Thank you, Chairman. Again, on point 26, would it be possible to have like a substitute appointed at the site visit who would then go to the committee?
Thank you, Chairman. I would suggest that there isn't a problem with having a substitute. It would be just the same as a normal planning committee, but obviously the substitute would need to carry through for the whole of the meeting. So it would just be the same as having a substitute in your normal planning committee.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much. Very happy with the amendments from our legal expert. I get the fact that it's better. I think the word used is better. It'd be better if we attended site visits. I understand that, but neither of you are saying it's lawfully imperative that we have to be at that. So let's be really clear about that. I think all members know we've got to turn up site visits. It aids our decisions. That's a good thing. But you've also outlined a circumstance where a member might not feel that they need to. They've been to that site 3 times before, etc. So again, I just think that we've got at our own discretion. If we don't feel able to judge something, we will be able to say, actually, I should have seen that site visit. I'll abstain or I won't vote. It could cause us significant problems if we did that. So actually, I'm happy to be voted down on this. I'm not set on, but I would like to propose that number 26 was cut out completely. With in Paul, there were times when you didn't feel it necessary to attend a site visit. I wasn't suggesting that, you know, it's not good in principle, but in practice, sometimes it might tie hands unnecessarily. And I don't think we should be in a job of tying members' hands. We should respect them to, you know, use their discretion. So I'm proposing to scratch number 26.
I'm afraid I disagree entirely. I think it is quite right that the site visit is seen as an integral part of the committee. Previous experience has shown sometimes people who have not done the site visit have clearly not grasped the significant issues that have been demonstrated at the site visits. And the other point for us with this new committee, we are all from different places, and I suspect a lot of the sites coming up will be very new to probably a majority in almost every case, because they're not local to us. And I think actually, although it talks about site visits by exception, I think at least to start with, we may find we actually want more site visits because we don't know the area, we don't know the circumstances, and we need to see for ourselves.
Councillor Johnson.
I was actually just making the same point.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I think it's right that you should not be able to take any part. If you haven't done the site visit and make that effort, then it could go against you, especially if it goes to appeal and you haven't had a site visit, but other people that didn't go to the site visit make a decision that if it went to appeal, you could be in trouble. And our solicitor at county always advised you must do the site visit or don't take part. And I think that's how it should be.
I'm aware that Mela made a proposal. Was there a seconder for that? Or... Sorry, Councillor Butt.
Yeah, it's, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
Sorry. Thank you. Yes, I can empathise with what Drew is saying with regard to the logistics of getting 15 people in the same place at the same time, and I can empathise with the requirement for us to have a good knowledge of what we're actually making a decision on at a later stage. There are many other ways in which you can do this. There's Google. I mean, anybody heard of that? Right, okay. But if this is going to be agreed by the committee, then I think we need to put down some markers, and that is, when will these site visits be? Are we going to have 25 days of site visits over you know, Marion's touched on the fact there's going to be lots of site visits, going to be doing lots, or is it going to be a set day that we can pop in our schedules and we can then keep those days free because a lot of us work and a lot of us have other things to do, other responsibilities. So with regard to that, I'd like to know if we're going to have morning site visits and then the meeting in the afternoon, or site visits the day before, but it does need to be around the convenience of this committee and also around the convenience of officers as to how they can schedule that into their work. And the other point is, I know we're on this particular point, but I'll raise another one while I'm here. We've heard very much about the members and the requirements and obligations and duties, but what are the requirements, duties and obligations of the officers on these site visits? There's nothing in the protocol with regard to that. Thank you.
Mr. Gans, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, yes, just to confirm, members, my understanding is that there is a corporate calendar setting out all committee meetings on the planning committee day. So planning committee is set out, I think, once every 4 weeks. The morning of that committee is set aside for training or site visits. At this point in time, we don't know how much training as a new committee you may need. Equally, we don't know how many site visits you will need to undertake. But the intention is the morning of the meeting will be where the site visits are held. Clearly, I can't confirm at what time they will start and where within BCP the first visit will be. We will try and manage that as best we can, so you're not shooting off all across the new area which you hold.
Thank you. If I could have a secondary on that, Mr. Chairman. So we do need to be crisp on this. We need to be clear on this. We need to have those times. We need to get, I mean, I've seen the schedule. I'm only subbing here today. But also, if we're going to be calling ad hoc meetings for extra work, as Marion has referred to, then we need to be very clear. I think you said there were going to be lots more site visits.
I said I think they will be very necessary. Not that there will be
more
than previously or more than scheduled on the calendar.
I stand corrected. I believe you said you thought there would be more. However, we need to be crisp on timings, and if there are to be more, then we do need to be well informed, well ahead, so we can get them in our schedules, because there are 15 of us to be in one place at one time with the officers. Okay, thank you.
I think that's something we'll have to work through as we go forward. We've got the mornings of the days of the committee and see what the numbers are, and if we end up with a lot of visits, we might have to revisit the timings of them. But, if we end up with a lot of visits, we might have to revisit the timings of them. But at the moment, in the mornings of the day of the committee, so yeah, but that should be adequate.
Yes, just to add, the morning would be the site visits. If I can just reassure Public Council the Providence point, yes, as officers, we're mindful that as a new group of members coming together, you won't all know the area of BCP, and you probably certainly won't know the sites which will come before you, unless it's a site which you do happen to know. That's where it comes back down to the officer's responsibility to ensure that we have sufficient material in this building, or whichever building we hold a committee, by photographs, by Google Earth, to appraise you of the site, and hopefully to get to a position where a site visit is exceptional rather than the norm. I do accept the issue. If a site visit becomes the norm, then the morning would probably be insufficient to get around every application. So it would only be an exceptional case.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on Drew Mellor's comment there. In the ideal world, of course, it's better for all the members to go on a site visit, but in practice, it's a large committee, and in practical terms, it can cause problems by requiring everybody to be there. And one thing that occurs to me is, from the site visits that I've been on before, it seems to me that there's going to be no debate effectively here. This is not a discussion, it's just to look at something effectively. And bearing that in mind, the debate will be subsequent to the visit, in which case it would be possible for those that don't attend the site visit to participate in the debate, albeit not necessarily with the same level, but nevertheless with the views of all the other people that did. And I would have thought that would have been sufficient for somebody to have made a judgment. It's not. Well, I'm trying to say that there must be a pragmatic approach taken here, because we are such a large committee, and it's going to be difficult, the logistics of just getting it organised and getting everybody there. So I think we've got to be a little bit more flexible on this, I'm afraid. So whilst I recognise the importance of everybody being there, and I'm sure everybody will try to, it might not be possible. And so I think we shouldn't constrain ourselves because of that, in particular where we decide to adjourn a meeting as opposed to defer it. Because that's significant too, because if you adjourn it, then everybody who has attended the visit has then got to participate in the planning decision.
So are you seconding the motion? Is that?
I think I second the motion that Drew has come with, that we actually get rid of that particular paragraph. Yeah.
Mrs. Barrowell, did you want to come back in there?
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to say that from a legal perspective, thinking about it, I'm not saying it's set in stone that you have to go to the site inspection. However, it may be that you've walked past that site from the public access many times, but you may be looking at something specific when you go on site, which you are not going to see if you're on the site inspection. The only other thing I would say is that we're very conscious in this day and age that we don't want an appeal on the basis that somebody, several councillors didn't attend a site inspection. So it's the public perception as well. So obviously it's for members to decide what they want to do. I just wanted to draw your attention to those facts.
Councillor Stripley.
Thank you. I think I've just had my fox shot, because my major point was it's largely a matter of public perception. If somebody is familiar with the site and has been on it, then they've obviously had at least some sort of conversation with the site owner, who might be an applicant, might be an objector, might be whatever, and all necessary points haven't been pointed out. The point is well made that we are a large committee. A long time ago I sat on a planning committee of 20 members, and site visits were conducted by having a coach. Well, I suggest that certainly for our first 6 months or so, whilst we're getting used to different parts of the conurbation with which we're not so familiar, that maybe site visits should be conducted to have a minibus so all members travel together. You haven't got to end up with a dozen cars in one tiny cul-de-sac or circling to look for a parking space before you can have the meeting. So I think it's a question of common sense and practicality, but I do think you need to have been seen to site visit. It's rather like if you come in halfway through the debate, you really shouldn't, and you haven't heard all of it, then you shouldn't really vote on it, even if you particularly want to. And I think if you haven't done half the work by being on site together to have the relevant points pointed out, then I think you shouldn't vote. I think the committee is sufficiently large enough for the absence of one member on voting should not be significant.
Councillor Butt.
I'm becoming increasingly confused. We heard from Ms Barrable about the likelihood of appeal with regard to reputational damage, but if there's no legal entity, if there's no legal requirement to actually be there in the first place, then I'm not quite sure what the applicant might appeal against, because it's not legally incorrect not to be at the site visit with everybody else at that given time. You can visit sites at other times. Yes, you can't go on public land if you can't go on land if you don't have permission. I agree on that. But it can be seen that the visit could be done at another time. There are other methodologies. It's not physically being there. There's Google. There are other ways of looking at it. The Town and Country Planning Act state that you must have familiarised yourself with this site. And there are many ways of familiarising yourself with this site other than physically taking yourself there. So I think, although I can see the spirit of this, absolutely see the spirit of it whatsoever, and we're trying to keep ourselves safe and open and accountable to the public, but I also think that as a body, we're also open and accountable to make a decision on behalf of all those applicants as one. And, you know, it's going to be very messy when, well, I didn't quite make it or I was later, I saw it last week. It's going to be, I mean, we're already agreed that we're going to be quite a flexible committee, but I think we've got enough flexibility without trying to encourage this. I think that all of us have an understanding that it's necessary, unless you're broken a leg or dead, that you really do need to be at the site visit. We're all grown-ups. I think we can understand that. I don't physically think we need anything in writing. It's been declared, I've said it, it's being taped. So I think we can all understand that there is an absolute need to be there. There will be the odd occasion when we physically can't be there. Fair enough, then we can't vote. But then if we can't be there, then fair enough. We have a reduced understanding of that particular site, as Stephen alluded to. But then we have other ways, I really don't feel that putting in a 26, it just binds us. It makes it too rigid. And I think in the spirit of it, we need to be mindful of it, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I feel like, whilst I understand what you are saying about the binding us in too much, perhaps, with this section 26, rather than scrapping it all together, which I think removes perhaps something that could be vital in proving the legitimacy of our decision on a planning application, it might be worth then looking at introducing a clause in 26 that if the member can prove that they already know the site well enough, or they have a legitimate excuse to not be there, that we can then add that into 26 rather than scrapping it entirely.
Councillor Miller.
I'll be brief, Chair. I really appreciate what Councillor Johnson is saying. I think proof is a bit of a different, but I'm very happy to keep it in there and say something like, every effort should be made, but ultimately it's members' discretion. Every effort should be made to familiarise ourselves with the site or attend a site visit, but it should be members' discretion. So I'm more interested in discretion than proof, but to some extent, I think we discussed this enough. Perhaps we should just move to the vote.
I agree. Yes. So to clarify, that's in essence is scrapping paragraph 26. Is that, so all those in agreement of that?
Scrapping it.
Of scrapping it, so that are not required to attend the site visit. If we're unable to do so, we can still vote on the application. Is that all? And all those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And any abstentions?
1.
Thank you. So that motion's fallen.
Chairman, may I just make one tiny amendment on 26? In the last line, if they're unable to attend the site visit, they will be unable to debate or vote on the application.
Chairman, I'd already mentioned that, I think earlier, that I'd suggested take part in the proceedings or vote on the application.
Anybody got anything else to raise on this protocol? So can we agree it with the amendments that...
Chair, could I just be clear then that the amendments in paragraph 5 and what was the other paragraph, Nikki? 13. Paragraph 13 regarding adjourn and deferment, and then are members happy to add that phrase in 26, take part? Okay. Do you want to formally vote to adopt the protocol? So all those in favour?
Sorry, we have my question with regard to officer obligations and duties within the protocol. We haven't heard what they are. Thank you.
Can you clarify what you...
We all have to conduct ourselves in a certain way, obviously, when we're on site, and it's as if we are in a meeting, okay? So there's going to be several officers there, and obviously it's going to be the requirement of the chair that if a question's put by a member as to which officer will answer that, are all officers going to suggest, what they think at any given time, or is it going to be that the chair will make the decision as to which officer will answer that, and if he's considered it to be answered correctly, etc. So, there is a bit of a protocol there about fielding cats, really, to make sure that everything is kept in order as far as the officer is concerned, and they're not compromised in their requirements as well. Thank you.
Do you want...
Chairman, I'm not sure if it helps, but at paragraph 17, it describes what the planning officer will be doing on site. It is the planning officer's responsibility to explain the application and to answer matters of fact at the committee. We can't always guarantee that the planning officer who has written that report will be available, but the most senior officer will be there instead if not.
Thank you for that clarification.
So, Chairman, could somebody move to adopt the protocol as amended in a second, and we'll just go to the vote. And second, Councillor Stribley. So, all those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's unanimous.
Okay, are there any urgent matters on the agenda? Councillor McCormack?
It's more of a constitutional thing, but I'm currently led to believe that members could only call in applications on the first 21 days that the application's notice has gone up, and I was wondering if the officer could clarify exactly the situation with members calling applications in.
Yes, and just to avoid the confusion for some preceding pool members, when we refer to call in, pool will refer to that as a red card. It's one of the same thing. The Constitution, as is your Constitution, sets out when a ward member can call in an application. It sets out that you should call the application in within or before the expiry of the neighbour notification period. Now, that neighbour notification period is published on the website. That will depend if there's a letter just sent out consulting residents, and usually speaking, that is normally within 1 or 2 days of receipt, so it's 21 days after. If there's a site notice displayed, that may take a few more days to get the site notice up. Again, the date of that will be on the website, and it's 21 days from the date of that notice. But the Constitution requires that if you wish to call an application in, you need to be aware of what applications are on your weekly list and I think now all members will have the weekly list of applications received at Bournemouth, Poole or Christchurch, because we still have 3 different offices and 3 different computer systems, so you'll all have those 3 different lists. And then you'll need to just check on the website when that call-in period ends to ensure you're not breaching the Constitution and seeking to call somebody in beyond the period.
Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I actually think that this ought to be rethought a little bit, because sometimes issues become apparent at the last minute. Residents will raise something and you don't always become aware that there's a significant concern about something or the nature of the concern until quite late in the day. And I think there should be a slightly longer period for ward members to call in an application based on that. So, 21 days plus a week or something, because otherwise I think there will be lots of things which should have been called in, which won't get called in, simply because of that time limit. And I think that time limit is a bit tight.
Councillor McCormack.
I believe that some authorities allow 5 days after the officer's recommendation has been put forward to call in an application.
Councillor Bartlett.
Just on a general point, I think we're sort of going outside the remit of the committee here, and that this is about policy, but there's clearly some elements of the Constitution which are being questioned, and I have a question about that, in how the or the planning aspects or procedures within the Constitution will actually be amended if required. Which body will actually be responsible for looking at that? And I think it's fair to say that the shadow authority was very pushed into getting the Constitution out in the timescales that they had. It was a very difficult, short frame. And I think it's probably fair to say that there are some elements in the Constitution which probably could do with a looking at. And I think the planning aspects of some of it are included in that. So I'm not sure what the correct forum for raising that is, but I'm not sure who would now address them. But I think that we have probably a right to ask, how and if we do need to look at policy, in particular the Constitution, where that will be addressed, and it needs to be put forward maybe to full council or cabinet, or I'm not quite sure, but I think we need to make some arrangements for that. Thank you.
I will come to you, Councillor Butt. I just wanted to ask Democratic Services if this is the right place to be debating this, or should this be going to the Constitution?
Thanks, Chairman. My understanding is that the Audit and Governance Committee will be responsible for maintaining an overview of the Council's constitution and governance arrangements, and I believe it will be reviewing the Constitution as a whole over the next 12 months or so. I think that was already agreed that it would be reviewed, and obviously any changes would then have to be adopted by the Council, so I think that's the appropriate mechanism.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you. We had in Poole in the dark days, and I believe Bournemouth did as well, we had a constitutional working party which was policy specific for planning. And again, I think that the audit and governance are a very, very wide remit. They'll cover the whole of the Constitution. It may be that a panel such as that could be created from this committee to look at those very constitutional matters. And of course, you have the expertise of everybody on this planning committee with their backgrounds to assist in that, to assist you in it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that the 21 days isn't long enough for members, so if we could get an extra week, make it 28 days, so it's all clear cut, and put that forward, I think that'd be very sensible.
That's something we can put forward to Audit and Governance.
Chairman, I'm sure any review of planning, audit and governance would consult with planning committee on that, but you're entitled. It's up to you whether you want to make a recommendation to audit and governance now.
Yeah, please.
As your Deputy Monitoring Officer, Tanya, Cornwall Regional Monitoring Officer, not clearly present at the moment, the Audit and Governance Committee will be reviewing it. They will be engaging with all the committees, This item isn't actually on the agenda. I don't believe it's an urgent item of business, so you can't actually make a recommendation from here. I think clearly your views can be captured. I am absolutely sure if the Audit and Governance Committee wish to engage more fully and establish a task and finish group, they will need to look at scrutiny issues, planning committee procedures and so on. I'm sure they will do that. I don't think it would be appropriate at this point for you to form a recommendation to Council or Audit and Governance since this item isn't on the agenda. But I appreciate you all having that debate, and clearly we can capture those views, but not as a formal recommendation at this stage.
Thank you for that guidance.
I think it's for this committee and this chair to decide whether an action is urgent, and you know, the constitution of it isn't quite the way it should be on important matters such as planning. Then I think it's perfectly legitimate to actually make a recommendation. We shouldn't tie ourselves in knots. We need the flexibility to be able to get things done the way we see that they need to be done, and not be bound by whether the urgency of which is a subjective assessment anyway, and in any case it's in the power of the chair to make that decision. So I would recommend that we still go ahead with the recommendation.
Councillor Stripley.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the previous speakers. I think the 21 days is too short. And over many years on planning, I have had residents phone me up and say, we're just back from holiday, or we've just been, you know, staying at a daughter's or wherever. We found this on our doormat and it ran out yesterday, but we're really worried, and can you make representation? And I've never had a problem before, because as long as we were always told the planning officer didn't really get down to determining a recommendation until all the representations are in. Now, if councillors have got to get their representations in by the same date, you're going to be hidebound. I think all councillors should be able to make representations at least 7 working days after the deadline, because it won't be finalised or ready for determination by the planning officers in any event at that point. And the other item I wish to notify, we were told we had to make representations or whatever before the chairman's briefing. Can it be then very clear that each month we are notified of the date of the chairman's briefing?
Yeah, certainly. In terms of the recommendation and the length of time of calling process, do we want to take a vote on that, whether it should be extended to 21 plus 7? Councillor Trent.
I would either propose or second. I think Councillor Hall effectively proposed it.
I would propose that,
that's
yes.
a proposal.
Yeah, good.
So those in favour?
Chairman, can I,
sorry
to interrupt. Can I just be clear? So this is a recommendation that you're making to A&G that's part of that overall review of the planning of the constitution, that be changed?
Yes.
Okay, to 28 days.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
So those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, can I just make sure members are aware that until Audit and Governance and in turn Council have agreed to change the Constitution, that 21 days you still need to be aware of. I don't want you to miss the date because you're thinking it's now 28 days. It's still at the moment 21 days until we get to that change, if it happens, to the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Ganch. Thank you, everybody. That closes the meeting. Oh, hang on.
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to have a quick word that at Bournemouth, I know we used to have a code of conduct for the planning board specifically. My understanding, I don't know what's happened at what used to happen at Poole and what used to happen at Christchurch, but my understanding is that it is the intention that we will have one put in the constitution for this planning board, for BCP Council Planning Board. Planning Committee, I've got to get used to that. It took me a long time to get used to board, now it's going to take me a long time to get used to committee. I intend to look at that and bring something forward, but I think I need to liaise a little bit further with the other planning officers as to what in addition we need, what can be removed and how that's good. So just to make you aware that won't be ready for your first committee, but it is something that we do intend to bring forward for you then to debate as you have today.
Okay, so that brings the first meeting of the BCP Council Planning Committee to a close. Thank you, everyone.